In this week's episode of Bleach, the 1,000-Year Blood War arc, a heavily injured Kenpachi is ambushed by the Bambies, Ichigo finally returns from the royal palace, and Yhwach prepares to make his next move. Yes, Ichigo is finally back. Well, I say finally, but unlike in the source material, we've actually spent a fair bit of time with Ichigo here in the anime since the start of the second Quincy invasion, so the wait to see him in action definitely hasn't felt quite as long. Plus, he only actually left the royal palace a couple of episodes ago. Regardless, his arrival heralds the second half of the invasion, and I've really been looking forward to this. As I've said previously, this is where things start to spiral a little out of control. In many ways, this is where it began to feel like Kubo just had too much on his plate and wanted to do too much, with numerous characters, fights and fates being dealt with off-screen as the sheer weight of the 1,000-Year Blood War arc began to make itself known. So I'm really excited to see how the anime adapts everything from this point forward. We're already seeing the trees of change bear fruit this week, with a hugely extended fight sequence that is a certified improvement over the source material. That being said, this was an oddly uneven episode for me. While I adored the new additions this week, a lot of the episode was marred by wonky animation, rough character art, and some really strange editing choices. The character art is especially noticeable because the art throughout the 1,000-Year Blood War arc anime so far has been absolutely stellar for the most part. In fact, it's one of the most obvious improvements over the original anime series, at least in my mind. Funnily enough, actually, this core has played out similarly to the first one in terms of where the priorities seem to lie. Episodes 5, 6, and 7 have been enormous spectacles, and then, as with the first core, episode 8 begins to reel it in a bit. The difference here, though, is that the battle is still ongoing at this point in the story in the core. Certainly, I'd argue then that Core 2 is more ambitious than the first, and it shows both for better and for worse sometimes. Anyway, as we begin our in-depth spoiler review and discussion of the 1,000-Year Blood War arc, episode 21, The Headless Star, as always, I'll be looking at this episode from the perspective of someone who has read all of the 1,000-Year Blood War arc, meaning there will be potential spoilers for the entire arc to follow, as we take a look at this episode to see what it added, what it changed, and what it took away from the source material. Before we get started on the video, guys, if you haven't hit subscribe yet, make sure to do that now for more Bleach content like this every single week. And if you enjoyed the video when you're done with it, make sure to give it a thumbs up as well to help support me and the channel. And if you want to take that support for me another step further, I do also have a Patreon as well. And as always, I want to say an enormous shout out and give a huge thank you to every single person who's supporting me over there on Patreon. I really do appreciate each and every one of you. Now, do you remember in last week's review when I said that hopefully we won't need to see another episode that covers quite so many chapters as that one again? Well, never mind, because episode 21, The Headless Star, covers another huge chunk of chapters, and I wonder if moving forward this might be the norm, at least until we reach the end of the core anyway. This is another episode where a decent amount of content, however, has also been cut, but unlike last week, that's juxtaposed by a great new sequence, which means there's even more in this episode, or at least feels like there is, than there was last time, somehow. So, these are the chapters covered in episode 21. We've got the second half of chapter 579, The Undead Six, chapter 580, The Light, chapter 581, The Hero 2, chapter 582, The Headless Star, the title of the episode, and from this point onwards, a name I imagine you'll get very used to hearing. Chapter 583, The Headless Star 2, Chapter 584, The Headless Star 3, Chapter 585, The Headless Star 4, and finally, really the latter 2/3 of Chapter 586, The Headless Star 5. So, episode 21 covers 7.5 chapters of material, which is again huge, and like I said, that's also while including a pretty hefty sequence of entirely new content, which is the extended fight scene for the Bambies that Kubo teased prior to the core beginning. Also, interestingly, this episode covers chapter 586, meaning we've passed the point now where there's fewer than 100 chapters of Bleach left to adapt. That's sad to say the least, but also exciting. Considering these first two cores have both adapted roughly 70 chapters each at this rate, then there must be a lot of new content coming in cores 3 and 4, or here's hoping anyway. But now, on to the spoiler analysis and review of the episode itself. The episode opens with an odd reuse of footage from chapter 565, God Like You, once again rapidly flashing by the same information that we received at the start of episode 14 and then again a few episodes ago. It's a shame that these are all reused shots, and it felt a bit unnecessary and even out of place to me. I like that they finally capped off 565 with the chapter's final, ominous shot of Yhwach as he thanks the souls of those who died, but in my opinion, this shot would have been better served taking place immediately after the scene of Kangdu and BG9's execution a couple of episodes ago. Don't forget, the reveal that Yhwach will regress back to his blind, deaf, and mute form if he doesn't continuously absorb souls is omitted during Uryu's talk with Yugrum in the anime, so this shot of Yhwach waking up and thanking those who died is likely to be, I would have thought, completely lost on anime viewers. Not only that, but the anime simply hasn't put the same emphasis on the passage of time as the source material. In the original chapters, Ikkaku mentioned that day had turned to night, and later we see the sun rising over the battlements to indicate one day moving to the next, but here we haven't had that at all really, so Yhwach feels like he's been asleep for maybe half an hour at most. That being said, he's well drawn in this shot, and I like his new lines to Uryu where he tells him to say goodbye to this abominable world as there's no turning back now. And I appreciate the anime emphasising that Yhwach actually hates the current state of the world, the current status quo, and there's of course the hint that he's about to make a big move. The episode kicks off properly with the second half of chapter 579 as Gremmy's enormous stage, the Seirete Stone Fort, collapses into rubble with his death. Squad 11's energetic reaction to realising the fight has ended is cut from the episode. Kenpachi muses over the fact that Gremmy's creations have all vanished, from the stage he built to the blood he left behind. Kenpachi suddenly violently coughs up blood of his own, realising he must have internal injuries from the fight with Grammy, before realising he can't hear very well either thanks to the blast. Kenpachi searches the scene for Yachiru, calling her name, when he suddenly stumbles across her Shihakusho and Vice Captain badge, seemingly totally abandoned. As his squad catches up to him, Kenpachi asks if they've seen her around. The CG officers standing just behind the hand-drawn ones are really off-putting, and definitely some of the worst and weirdest CG used so far, in my opinion. They move in a very unnatural way, and it doesn't help that the same character model is reused right beside another one in clear view of the screen. Also, interestingly, it begins raining at this point in the source material, but that doesn't happen in the anime. Speaking of which, how does rain even work in the Seirete? Are there clouds beneath the Shakon Maku? It certainly looks like that throughout the source material, but can rain even get through the Shakon Maku? How does that actually work? I mean, presumably it can, I guess, but either way it doesn't rain in the anime. Kenpachi roars at his men to find Yachiru, and they rush into action as Kenpachi ponders her strange disappearance. I do wonder what must have been going through his head at this moment, because he had no inkling really that she was actually his Zanpakuto toe spirit. That was probably the last thing he was thinking about, so as far as he's concerned, she's just somehow taken off all of her clothes and is running around the battlefield naked or something. Suddenly, however, Kenpachi is blasted by a bolt of lightning as more sternritter arrive on the scene. Immediately, this is different to how it played out in the original chapter. When Candice appeared, she announced her arrival by killing a group of Squad 11 officers rather than striking Kenpachi himself, though thinking about it, attacking Kenpachi first probably does make more sense. In the source material, chapter 579 ended with a full-page spread of the Bambies descending onto the battlefield to wipe out Squad 11. Quite a lot of this next sequence is either cut from the anime or rearranged, so let's compare how the two play out. In the source material, the now fried officers call out to Kenpachi as their squad mates curse their deaths. Candice appears clutching an orb of lightning as Squad 11 exclaims they're going to kill her for what she's done. Giselle mocks Candice for hitting so few of them, and just as Candice prepares another blast, Kenpachi appears right behind her and tries to slash her. As he swings, Candice disappears appears using her shrift, the Thunderbolt, to transform into lightning itself and reappear behind him, blasting the captain with a wave of power. As Kenpachi crumples in midair, Meninas appears behind him and punches him squarely in the back, sending him rocketing towards Earth. Candice is unable to fathom how Kenpachi could even move after fighting Gremmy, as more of Squad 11 attempts to rush the sternritter, one officer ordering a group of the others to protect Kenpachi. However, Lil Toto jumps down in front of them and uses her power, the Glutton, to devour them all as they try to flee. Kenpachi rises from the ground again, smoke billowing from his body as he tells them to stop, but Candice blasts him once more. Increasingly concerned about their captain, his squad tries to reach him, but Meninas drops an entire building on them using her shrift, the Power, telling them that Zaraki is about to die. Meanwhile, although she hasn't attacked them at all, Squad 11 members surround Giselle and strike her, sending her blood spraying everywhere. As it lands on them, she then transforms them into her mindless corpse puppets using her shrift, the Zombie, and commands them all to kill themselves, which they do in a gory fashion. Having now wiped out Squad 11, the four Bambies approach Kenpachi, the captain lying immobile on the floor. I've always really liked this sequence, to the point where I made an entire video on how this and Ichigo's subsequent arrival was one of Bleach's best scenes. Seeing Kenpachi struggle to defend his officers is brutal, as he keeps getting back up, only to be viciously blasted again to the point of near death. Meanwhile, his men are trying to do the same, desperate to reach their captain, showing a lot of courage and zeal as they attempt to take on these enemies who are clearly far stronger than them, but to no avail. The anime's version is, like I said, both rearranged and cut down, and in my opinion doesn't hit quite as hard. In the episode, Kenpachi is zapped by Candice immediately, and it seems to knock him out, leaving him standing paralysed on the spot. This definitely feels kind of weird to me. If it's that easy to knock Kenpachi out at this point, why doesn't Candice just keep blasting him relentlessly until he's dead? Why even bother with the officers at all when such small fry can basically do nothing to you? The scene then skips to Lil Toto's arrival, where she begins eating the Shinigami. Lil Toto's the Glutton was always one of the weirdest shrifts in the series, and the anime captures it very well here. Interestingly, while the Bambies all receive their splash screens here, just as they do in the original chapter, their actual shrifts aren't revealed, which makes me wonder if and when we'll ever actually learn them. We then get a pretty harsh cut, which is one of those weird editing choices, to a totally still image of several Shinigami with Meninas holding a building far above them, which he then drops, crushing them all in a splatter of blood. The sequence continues with Giselle's introduction as one of the officers slashes her, creating a massive, gaping wound in her shoulder, which then sprays blood everywhere. As Giselle commands them all to kill themselves, the reaction shots of the officers are cut, featuring one of them suddenly not being able to feel his hands as her power takes effect. However, I do like that you actually see the Shinigami in this scene. It's very grisly, and it bounces off really well with Giselle's overly playful nature. The anime then takes us back to the start of chapter 580 as a group of officers are surrounding Kenpachi, trying to protect him, which is nice to see. However, Candice simply electrocutes them all with one strike before we get that same full-page spread of the four of them from the cliffhanger of 579, which doesn't work quite as well here, as they're clearly arriving on the scene in this image. For example, Lil Toto is floating in with her umbrella, yet earlier she's already landed on the ground. There's a cool overhead shot of the battlefield which shows all of the various ways the Shinigami were murdered, as the Bambies decide to now take down Kenpachi, who is still just standing there. However, he vanishes, which makes me wonder how long he's been awake for and why he didn't try and step in to defend his men. Kenpachi appears behind Candice and tries to strike them all, but they all leap out of the way. And unfortunately, Candice transforming into lightning herself is removed from the episode, and she instead flips behind the captain before striking him with another blast. This next section is a little extended, as a seriously wounded Kenpachi keeps trying to almost aimlessly swing at the girls before lunging for Lil Toto and Giselle, only for Meninas to swoop in and land a massive punch in his back, sending Kenpachi spiralling down to the earth below with an enormous crash. As Kenpachi rises again, Candice blasts him once more, finally defeating him as the captain now lies in a smoke-filled crater unable to move. As the Bambies all argue over who gets to deliver the killing blow, I like the little detail that to Kenpachi, their voices are muted and mumbling. Either he's now so injured that he can barely hear anything, or that's what his hearing has been like since Gremmy's explosion, as he mentioned earlier. Either way, it's a nice attention to detail. But as Kenpachi wonders if he's about to die, we get another big deviation from the source material. In the source material, this is the cliffhanger of chapter 580, which ends with the enormous substitute Shinigami badge-shaped explosion in the sky, signalling Ichigo's arrival, but that scene here is moved to later in the episode. Following on from that cliffhanger in the source material, chapter 581 opens with a lengthy scene featuring Omaida struggling against several soldat while carrying the injured Soifon and his sister Moreo before being rescued by Shinji and Momo, who tell him they need to converge on Kenpachi's location as fast as they can before being ambushed by Bazz-B. In the anime, this entire scene is completely removed. While it's a bit of a shame it's gone, really, when you look at it holistically, the only victim here is Omaida, whose heroic efforts aren't showcased in the episode as a result. Otherwise, the rest of the scene was always just a bit of a non-starter, and it makes sense that it's gone. Shinji basically just tells us what we already know, that the enemy is focused on killing Kenpachi while he's weak to tilt the odds in their favour, and that they need to hurry to his side as fast as they can. What makes the scene even worse, though, is that Bazz-B then arrives and uses Burner Finger 3 to surround Shinji and Omaida with a seemingly inescapable lava flow, preventing them from reaching Kenpachi and nearly killing them. Of course, this is another situation that is resolved entirely off-screen, as Shinji and the others simply arrive much later in chapter 612 at the Shinigami's headquarters completely unscathed, while Omaida hand-waves this scene away with a paltry explanation. To be honest, I'm glad the anime is pretty much just doing away with the loose ends of the second invasion, Nanana spying on Renji, and now this, with potentially more to come as well. I will say though, it's funny that I used to have such high hopes for this scene. When word came out about a new fight in this core, my first thought was Shinji versus Bazz-B would actually be shown. Later, after we learned that Shinji was going to be revealing his bankai in this core, I thought it would be during some version of this scene. It feels like a humorous irony that, after all this speculation, this scene is just totally cut in the end. However, following on from this, we get a scene from the chapter featuring Rukia and Byakuya as they make their way across the landscape. Rather than see a lightning bolt strike the ground in front of them, however, they simply feel Kenpachi's Reiatsu fading fast. I liked the fact they could see the lightning hitting the ground from where they were originally, as it added a sense of scope to the scene, but it's not a big deal. As Rukia tries to hurry to Kenpachi, Byakuya tells her not to be impatient, as she still hasn't recovered from her previous battle. In the anime, Byakuya is still wearing his Oken turban, but in the original chapter it's now inexplicably gone, despite him wearing it again later. In the source material, Rukia seems to sense Ichigo's Reiatsu before Byakuya does, but in the episode they realise at the same time. As Ichigo jets towards the Seirete, parting the clouds as he bolts down from the heavens, his arrival is mostly the same as it is in the source material. We see a great shot of him from afar as he approaches the veil, followed by Renji, Ikkaku and Yumichika all glancing up at the sky. With a big smile on her face, Rukia knows exactly who it is. We get some really cool angles on Ichigo as he smashes into the shack on Maku, creating an enormous, fiery explosion of light in the shape of the substitute Shinigami badge, the cliffhanger from chapter 580, though it looks a lot better here in the anime. The blast is followed immediately by brand new reaction shots from Bazz-B, Pepe, Nanana and Robert, which I really like to see, before we see the Bambies notice his arrival as well. The anime keeps the comedic moment of Ichigo miscalculating his flight and crashing into a nearby tower before he instantly appears behind the Bambies, moving unbelievably fast. Although them spinning around to look at him is cut, it's replaced by something even better in my opinion. In the anime, Ichigo has moved so fast that he's created a vast vacuum of air behind him. All of a sudden, that air catches up to him, creating such a violent gust that the four Bambies are all blown away by its immense pressure. It's a really cool and effortless way of showing, rather than telling, just how quick Ichigo was moving. As Ichigo stands over the defeated Kenpachi who can barely speak, the title of the episode flashes on screen as Kenpachi asks him what he's doing there. With a broad, confident grin, Ichigo reveals that he came to help Kenpachi, the captain smirking in response, finding it hard to believe that they're in this situation. This is the ending of chapter 581, and it's a good one. I love this moment in the source material. It's not only a fantastic, exciting showcase for the main character, who had been sorely lacking them in the 1,000-Year Blood War arc up until now, but it's a wonderful development on his relationship with Kenpachi too. It's come full circle as Kubo parallels Kenpachi rescuing Ichigo from Neutra and Tesla in the Waco Mundo arc. In that way, it goes a long way to show just how much Ichigo has grown too. Also, throughout this entire sequence, a new version of Number 1 has been playing. I think we all guessed a long time ago that Number 1 would play during this sequence. I mean, it really has to, as it's one of Ichigo's most triumphant scenes in the arc, and to be honest, he's not going to get many chances for more in the future. I like the music, and while it's probably not my favourite iteration of Ichigo's iconic theme song, it grows on me every time I listen to it, and people may find it a little too upbeat and cheery for what's ostensibly supposed to be a pretty bleak moment, but at the same time, compare Ichigo's arrival here to his arrival in the first invasion. This time, no one is stopping him from reaching the Seirete. Ichigo arriving is something all the Shinigami will be very happy about, so it makes sense to me that suddenly this jazzy, almost swaggering track would play. I liked this whole sequence a lot and thought it was handled really well here in the anime, even if Ichigo himself is a little stiff-looking during the actual reveal. As we begin chapter 582, Ichigo is attacked from behind by Candice, who tries to blast him with another bolt of lightning. However, as she reaches him, Ichigo simply leaps over her, grabs her outstretched arm, and flings her into a nearby building. It's a really slick piece of animation that looks great, and in my opinion, after being fairly lukewarm on the first third of this episode or so, this is where things really start to get good this week. As Candice crashes into the tower, Giselle, Lil Toto and Meninas all attempt to jump Ichigo, but he dodges their strikes, save for Lil Toto, who he can't quite outrun, as her jaw manages to snag his Oken cloak. By the way, is it actually really impressive that the sternritter can damage this cloak or not? I thought the Oken cloak was meant to be extraordinarily powerful, but Lil Toto's the glutton is able to tear it, and Candice later completely annihilates it. So, is its defense only good for a couple of attacks, or was its defense severely neutered by him hitting the Shakon Maku? Anyway, as Ichigo stops momentarily, taken aback by Lil Toto's power, Giselle and Meninas lunge at him again, but he punches all three of them, sending each of them flying into nearby houses with a massive plume of dust. Honestly, I really love this. I love how it's portrayed, I love how easily Ichigo bats them away, and I enjoy the fact that Number 1 is still blaring over the top of this showcase, and this is really only just the beginning. As the three collect themselves, including Giselle breaking her neck back into place, Lil Toto reveals he's the Number 1 special war power on their list, Ichigo Kurosaki. By the way, I've said it before, but I'll say it again, I really like Lil Toto's voice. It's not what I was expecting at all, but I think it works very well. It's surprisingly mature, somewhat sardonic, and it fits her perfectly. To be honest, they're all really good. Even Meninas, who is a character that I never cared about at all in the source material, is elevated a lot by a good, fitting voice, and of course the extra attention she gets this week. Candice re-emerges, raging at the fact that Ichigo covered her in dust. While Ichigo is barely even trying at the moment, it's also a testament to these sternritter that they're not particularly injured at all. Also, at this point in the battle, things have been playing out very similarly, if not identically, to the source material. Candice summons her Quincy bow and fires a massive electrically charged arrow at Ichigo called Galvano Blast, which seemingly incinerates him. However, as Lil Toto correctly determines, not only is Ichigo not dead, he's also unharmed. Unfortunately, this is the end of the line for his Oken clothing, which is a shame as it really did look awesome, but that's a source material issue too. However, we do get to see Ichigo's brand new post-Royal Realm look that he'll adopt for the rest of the series. He's now wearing bulky armour in the shape of an X across his chest, including a pair of ornate shoulder pads, and a tattered bottom half of what looks like an extravagant version of a captain's Hayori around his waist. On the whole, I was always mixed on this appearance of his. There's something about the armour that definitely looks suited to the endgame feeling that this part of the story has, but the actual X section that goes across his torso always looked pretty goofy to me. That being said, I'm a fan of the actual shoulder armour itself, and I'm an even bigger fan of the messy, painterly-like Captain's Hayori, so it's all good in the end. Unfortunately, his face is drawn a little strangely in this shot, but otherwise he looks great. Ichigo's line about it being difficult to fight girls is cut from the episode, as is his surprise that they're all alive and well after being attacked by him. As we reach the end of chapter 582, the Bambies all summon their Quincy bows and prepare to shoot Ichigo as he readies his swords to fight. Meanwhile, Yhwach realises Ichigo has arrived before telling Uryu and Hashwolf it's time to begin. At the same time, down below, Askin notices Yhwach is about to make his next move and wonders if he'll be among the chosen few or not. Back in the day, we obviously had no idea what was going on here, and it made for a very sinister cliffhanger, but of course Askin is wondering if he'll be taken up to the royal palace or not. As chapter 583 begins, the shot of Lil Toto firing her arrow, followed by a close-up of the unique individual arrowheads of each Bambi, is cut. Instead, we go straight to Candice being flung into yet another building before Giselle, Meninas, and Lil Toto all slam into her. It's another comedic moment that I'm glad was kept in, as each of them seems to hit Candice on purpose, or at least to a degree of being on purpose, especially when Lil Toto drives her boot into her friend's face. But as the Bambies remark about Ichigo's power, Candice activates her Volstendig, preparing to take him on again. Once again, I love the emerald colour of her power, though it's weird there's no column of light for her activation this time. Candice attempting to motivate her colleagues to fight is cut from the episode as she asks them how they could possibly face Yhwach were they to lose to Ichigo, before telling them that he'll grant her anything she wants if she succeeds. The other Bambies then all imagine their wishes. Meninas wants a luxury mansion, Lil Toto wants endless food, and whatever Giselle wants is either censored or it's eternal darkness. Regardless, it's a shame this was cut, as it's really nice characterisation for these three, though I appreciate it would be difficult to organically include a short sequence like this in amidst the action. Candice's holy form seems to work slightly differently in the anime when compared to the source material. After ripping off two of her wings to use as blades, she locks her swords with Ichigo as we see him using his true Zangetsu for the very first time. Ichigo mentioning he now uses two swords, however, is cut from the episode, as is Candice correcting him, saying that she uses 6. In the anime, when Candice clashes with Ichigo, the remaining wings of her holy form seem to detach and strike Ichigo himself before returning to her back, which is a really cool new detail. Candice then launches one of the wings at Ichigo in an attack called Galvano Javelin, but he activates his new Getsuga Tensho, simply drawing a tiny sliver of power across the air. But it's enough to cancel out Candice's Galvano Javelin completely. This is definitely the weirdest, most unique way we've ever seen Ichigo use Getsuga Tensho, and it seems to really be just a flex. After all he does is draw out a tiny portion of his power and allow her Javelin to collide with it, showing that's all he needs to stop her attacks. But perhaps even more than that, it shows you the level of control he now has over Getsuga Tensho, which makes it even weirder that in the source material at least, he never really uses it like this ever again. Up until now, however, Ichigo's battle with the Bambies has been virtually identical to the source material, but no longer. This is where things get pretty wild. Rather than continue the battle with Candice as it happens in the original chapter, Ichigo simply zips over to her, slamming his elbow into her gut and forcing her into yet another building. Watching this unfold, Lil Toto comments that Candice can't kill Ichigo in her Volstendig and that he exceeds their Daton. Now this is an interesting comment. Did the data insinuate that a sternritter in Volstendig would be enough to defeat Ichigo? It's difficult to say, as we've only seen him taking on Kirige beforehand at this point, and he was outclassing his Volstendig while in Bankai, and that was before his Royal Realm training. But it's cool that he far exceeds their data now, because their data obviously doesn't take into account the fact that he was trained by the Zero Division. Lil Toto then says they've got no choice, and what follows is a truly just fantastic addition all around. In fact, it's the kind of addition that I absolutely love to see. Kubo teased before the core release that the Bambies would get a new fight scene, and presumably this is it. To counter Ichigo's incredible power, Giselle, Meninas, and Lil Toto each activate Sclavarai, a Quincy's ultimate power to totally dominate Reishi and bend it to their will. It's amazing seeing them use Sclavarai. In the source material, Kirige OP was literally the only sternritter ever to use this power, which made no sense at all. Seeing the Bambies use it makes them feel inherently more Quincy-like in nature, and I have to wonder if any sternritter in the future will also use Ranso Tengai. It is kind of interesting that they're using Sclavarai before activating Volstendig, as originally Kirige could only use Sclavarai thanks to the halo on his head in his holy form. By destroying it, Ichigo stopped him from using it. Regardless, I'm really happy to see this, and it's cool that each Bambi gets their own almost magical girl-style dynamic pose as they use the power, the animation for which suddenly looks incredible. As they all use Sclavarai, they activate their own Volstendig at the same time, Ichigo surrounded by pillars of blue, yellow, and pink light. At this point, I already thought this was fantastic, but it proceeds to get even better. We then see each of the Bambies activate their holy forms, and their individual forms are now named as well, which is just another piece of information we never had before, but I am so glad to be given now. Giselle's Volstendig is called Azal Biora, the Death of God. Meninas' form is called Pornipara, the Power of God, while Lil Toto's is Gagael, the Hunger of God. And again, each of the Bambies gets their own distinct activation ritual, again, each of which looks brilliant. Almost too brilliant in that these sequences completely blow the rest of the episode out of the water. They almost look like they're from a different episode. But if you thought that was it, oh no, there's even more good stuff here. In the source material, their holy forms were just a simple, disappointing pair of wings and a halo. Here, using Sclavarai at the same time, absorbing and controlling the Reishi around them, has allowed them to bolster their holy forms considerably, even changing their appearance. Giselle's Azal Biora goes from just a simple pair of skeletal wings to her having a chibi skull and rib cage appear on her chest, as well as a long skeletal tail. Meninas' changes from simply having a pair of wings made up of hearts to having a huge heart-shaped breastplate gleaming into life on her torso, heart-shaped pads on her knees and feet, and bright pink Reishi dumbbells in her hands. Meanwhile, Lil Toto gains gold spiked cuffs around her ankles and her wrists, and her wings, which were originally only a single row of teeth each, turn into a huge pair of snapping jaws. This isn't just a small new addition, this is a substantial amount of new information about these three characters, and fixes at least a couple of issues I had with how the Sternritter were presented in the source material. For starters, it was always disappointing that the holy form names were so inconsistent. At least here, several other forms are actually named. The other issue is simply how bland, uncreative and rushed so many of the forms turned out to be. Here, they look vastly improved, thanks as well to the anime's amazing colours and effects, and these forms are now more in line with the slightly better Volstendigs of characters like Kirige, Askin, and Master Masculine. Instantly, these characters look and feel so much better, but guess what? That's not even everything either. As the three of them charge into battle with Ichigo, we get a fully fledged battle sequence, all of which is entirely brand new, featuring full, complete ability sets for all three of these Sternritter. In the source material, Candice was the only one of the four to get any named attacks. Now all of them have a laundry list of unique creative powers at their disposal. So let's take a look at how the battle plays out. Meninas kicks off the fight by attempting to punch Ichigo at close range with her dumbbells, using an ability called Dumbbell Duster, where she rapidly jabs at him. Again, the animation has really been taken up a notch here as Ichigo clashes with her repeatedly, gold sparks flying as his blades rebound off her dumbbells. As Meninas kicks away from Ichigo, she extends her dumbbells, transforming them into lengthy batons, revealing another new power. Dumbbell Duster Baton Beat, giving her more range and versatility with longer weapons. I believe what she's supposed to represent here is a majorette, I think they're called, a baton twirler who performs in a parade or marching band. Meninas is already a much more interesting character here in the anime than she was in the source material, that's for sure. Meanwhile, as Meninas clashes with Ichigo, Lil Toto places her hands together and fires off her first ability, Spork, which is a great name. The attack launches a massive version of her spiked cuff towards her enemy at an extremely fast speed, and it completely punches a hole through the building behind Ichigo. She then appears in the air above Ichigo and reveals her second ability, Spife, unlocking one of the cuffs around her wrist and slinging it towards Ichigo like a serrated whip, where it collides with his blade like a chainsaw, forcing him back down towards ground level. Now on the ground, Ichigo is confronted by Giselle, who activates her own powers. The first ability, Dancing Dead Boys Club, sees Giselle shake several bones loose from her wings before they rise up as chibi cartoonish skeletons who then all rush down Ichigo. Again, it's the little details here that elevate this to something special. The Hanna-Barbera old-school cartoon sound effects that play to accompany the skeletons works really well, and I love how this feels like a weaker, goofier version of Yamamoto's terrifying bankai ability. I also really enjoy how this power actually reflects Giselle's own shrift, the zombie, which relies on people attacking her to work. Here, when Ichigo strikes and destroys the Dancing Dead Boys themselves, their second ability activates as their bones then collectively lock Ichigo into place. Giselle's second ability, Munchy Munchy Babies, sees her wield a pair of skulls on her hands, but we unfortunately don't actually get to see this in action. Well, I say unfortunately, but this next segment of the battle is just fantastic. As Giselle closes in on the trapped Ichigo, Lil Toto activates another ability, Golden Crunch, which unleashes a huge golden bear trap upon Ichigo, rising up from the ground around him and closing shut with a vicious snap, accidentally catching Giselle in its jaws too. Except it hasn't worked. Ichigo broke free of Giselle's bones and stopped Lil Toto's jaws with his hands and feet. I love how completely relieved Giselle is, only for Ichigo to just bail as soon as Meninas arrives, meaning the jaws of Golden Crunch end up closing on Giselle's neck anyway, blood splattering everywhere. It's not only really inventive, it's just a lot of fun as well. It's a funny moment that works really great, and honestly this is definitely the best original battle scene in the anime so far. Meninas' next ability, Dumbbell Duster Halteres, I think that's pronounced, transforms her dumbbell into a halteres, which is a type of dumbbell used in ancient Greece. She speeds towards Ichigo, but as I mentioned, he leaps out of the way, so Meninas instead smashes headfirst into Lil Toto's Golden Crunch, causing it to roll towards the sternritter with Giselle's head still poking out from between the fangs. Honestly, it's excellent stuff, it really is. I had a huge smile on my face throughout the entire battle. Mostly I just couldn't believe how much new content we were actually getting. But with Lil Toto, Giselle and Meninas being essentially tossed aside, Candice steps in again. There seems to be a slight mistake here. Candice's Vollständig already appears enhanced, as per the lightning bolts on her thighs and ankles, but they don't actually appear until she uses Sclaverai in a minute. This is where we technically resume chapter 583, but in actuality this is even more slightly new content. Instead of immediately activating her ultimate attack, Electrocution, Candice also activates Sclaverai, and we see her absorbing all of the buildings around her to boost her strength. This is when her holy form transforms, adding the lightning bolts on her collar, her thighs, and her boots, and she reveals its name too. Balbariel, the Thunder of God. Again, I am so happy to see this, though it is weird now that of all the Bambies, Bambietta herself is the only one who gets the smallest showcase in the end. No holy form name, no enhanced holy form, no extra abilities, nothing like that. Let's also talk about this new usage of Sclaverai for a moment. So what seems to be happening here is that these sternritter are using Sklaverei to enhance the power of their Volstendig, which does make sense. I have a few questions though. Are these more ornate designs the true power and appearance of their holy forms, or is that the more basic design instead? Personally, obviously, I hope it's this more interesting looking version. Secondly, can every sternritter do this? And if so, were characters like Masked Masculine and Asnod and maybe even Bambietta already using their enhanced Volstendig? Does that go some way to explain why Asnod's look so vastly different to everyone else's? The new abilities that we see the Bambies use, can they use these powers without using Sklaverei first? We see Candice use Galvano Blast in her basic form, so perhaps they can, though they seem to specifically use the new design of their forms to activate and utilise their powers, so maybe not. Anyway, as Candice grows enraged with Ichigo, she prepares her greatest power, electrocution, charging an immense amount of green electricity around her before launching a huge, thunderous pillar of energy at Ichigo. As we reach the end of chapter 583, Ichigo draws another thin arc of Getsuga Tensho in front of him before lifting his other blade behind him, a golden gleam running along the sharp of the metal. Ichigo then drives a slash down the middle of the Getsuga Tensho, activating a brand new ability, Getsuga Jujisho, a cross-shaped dual Getsuga made of fiery, heavenly golden Reiatsu that really does look tremendous in the anime. The sensation of power is absolutely palpable as the attack completely carves through Candice's green light, spiraling towards her rapidly. Yes, it's essentially just two Getsuga Tensho affixed together, but damn, it really does look incredible, and it's so awesome to see Ichigo using a new technique like this, and so casually as well. But Candice foolishly attempts to defuse the attack with a strike of her own, only for Ichigo to warn her to dodge it instead. Ichigo shouting this to her is definitely a little bit weird. It's almost like his protective instincts took over for a moment because it doesn't really make sense otherwise. Presumably he launched the attack with the intention of hitting her with it in the first place, and it's not like he hasn't been smacking these enemies around since the start. Ichigo isn't so naive or good-hearted that he doesn't want to hurt or even kill his enemies at this point in the story, so it does feel a bit odd. To me, it seems like an inelegant way for Kubo to let the reader know that this ability is the real deal and is very dangerous. We get new reaction shots from the other three Bambies as they watch the fireball completely shatter the sky above before we carry on with chapter 584. As with the chapter, it is weird that after taking that hit, Candice has only lost a single arm. Presumably she did try to stop the attack, but her outstretched arm took the full force of the blast and was completely ripped off. But still, I'd imagine a strike like Getsuga Jujisho would have wounded her more seriously than that. Candice demands that Giselle heal her, and she does so by grafting the flesh from dead Shinigami into a new arm for her sternritter comrade. As Candice launches herself into battle again, however, she, along with the other Bambies, are suddenly sniped from afar by Burner Finger 1. Bazz-B arrives on the scene, his own Volstendig activated as he takes out his fellow sternritter. Bazz-B's Volstendig has a really cool colour scheme and almost liquid-like effect to it, but it still looks really boring and really lazy, and I hope that he gets an enhanced one too, like the Bambies in the future. As Bazz-B prepares to try and steal their kill, however, he too is surprised by the appearance of even more sternritter. Robert Akutrone, Pepe Wakabrada, and Nana Nanajakoop all arrive on the scene, each of them wanting the opportunity to kill Ichigo, with Robert even proposing they all share the glory between them. As Lil Toto says that the one who kills Ichigo will get all the glory, we see a fantastic shot of Ichigo surrounded by all 8 of the sternritter now there, which interestingly is every sternritter currently active on the battlefield except for Askin. Just before a fight can break out, however, a massive pillar of blue light erupts forth from a tower in the background. A scene from earlier in the chapter was actually cut when Yhwach ordered Hashwolf to activate the key, followed by Ygritte lifting his own sword into the air, from which a blinding light in the shape of a Quincy pentagram shone out. Again, this is another scene I'm ultimately glad was cut, as it was just never explained what this was or how Hashwolf could even do it. What key is this? How does Hashwolf have said ki? Was it just their mode of transport to take them to the royal palace? If so, why was it Hashwolf who could seemingly do it? It seems like the light from his sword then activated the giant rune that they were standing on, but while the rune is present in the anime, it doesn't seem to really do anything in particular in the episode itself. This is another one of those situations where it's best to remove the section that just brings up all the unnecessary questions and go with the simpler route. Starting chapter 585, Yhwach prepares to invade the royal palace thanks to Ichigo's arrival punching a hole in the Shakonmaku above them. However, Yhwach's entire explanation to Ichigo is cut, as I theorised it would be a few weeks back when we got essentially the same explanation from Senjumaru instead. That being said, we do still receive a similar bit of exposition, this time from Mayuri in a new scene. It's always nice to see more of Akon, but this scene is quite good actually for a number of reasons. Firstly, Mayuri alludes to that cut Hashwolf scene while also making everything make more sense overall. Mayuri simply calls Ichigo the key who has opened the gate, which in this sense is the sky, basically, which just simply refers to Ichigo's arrival having opened a pathway for Yhwach. I'm not entirely sure how Mayuri knows the true nature of the Oken, but then it is Mayuri, so I guess he most likely has his ways. However, I really love how foreboding this sequence is. The sinister music playing as Yhwach smirks, gazing up into the sky at his one true goal, which is now within reach. Plus the visual of the pillar of blue light rising up through the crimson veil and then the sky itself parting the clouds looks really wonderful. There's also a nice additional new scene where Kyoraku confirms he suspected Yhwach was really after the Soul King all along. This is then followed by a very surprising new shot. The episode reveals Aizen fully sealed deep within Muken, a red glow coating him from his bindings. A brief shot lingers on Aizen's concealed face for just a moment. While I was surprised initially to see him, I think the reason for his appearance is actually quite simple. Firstly, to drum up excitement, of course, but more importantly, Kyoraku has confirmed that Yhwach's goal not only aligns with Aizen's, but that he's actually going to make it to the palace where Aizen failed to do so. It's likely then that Aizen can sense as much from deep within his prison, and the anime wanted to remind us that this was initially his goal to begin with, and that as the Soul King begins to get more readily involved in the story, so too might Aizen. I will say that I absolutely love how this sequence ends. Mayuri curses Squad Zero, wondering what they're possibly thinking, as the camera lingers on a very ominous shot of Ichibe's face as he waits within his palace. I believe this shot of Ichibe is actually taken from chapter 613, where he again, very ominously, spoke of the heroes not being able to defeat Yhwach. It's clear now that the anime has been absolutely doubling down on making the Squad Zero, specifically Ichibe, appear very untrustworthy. Ichibe clearly has his own agenda that doesn't benefit the Soul Society or even Ichigo at all. From what we know from the supplementary material, it still seems likely that Ichibe's ultimate plan is to use Ichigo as a replacement Soul King. But what is this particular scene with Mayuri trying to say about them and their goals? Well, it seems likely to me that the anime is trying to imply that Ichibe wants Yhwach to make it to the palace. Mayuri can't understand why they would knowingly send Ichigo down in the Oken robes when they know it would create a pathway for Yhwach to tread upon in order to reach the palace. Therefore, the only logical conclusion then is that they, or at least Ichibe, want him to step foot on those holiest of grounds. Perhaps Ichibe wants Yhwach to make it so he can kill him once and for all, or maybe there's more to it than that. Either way, I love the way the anime is having Ichibe just give off the most villainous of vibes. Ichigo then attempts to rush towards Yhwach, only to be blindsided by Meninas, who pushes his head into a building. Meninas now seems to only be using the basic version of her holy form, but she reveals yet another move, Diamond Push, which sends Ichigo absolutely flying into the air. As is seemingly tradition now, Nanana's brief appearance in this sequence is completely cut. In the original chapter, he leaps at Ichigo in midair and tries to slam his fists into him, only to completely miss as Ichigo swoops around him. Admittedly, it's a pretty awkward looking sequence, so I'm not too surprised it was the one to go. Instead, as Ichigo rights himself and continues flying, he's suddenly confronted by Robert, who places a gun to his head. Unlike in the source material, Robert is actually using his holy form, Grimaniel, here, though it's a different colour for the third time running. In the first core, it was the typical Quincy blue. This was then amended in the Blu-ray to a light aqua, which was replicated here earlier in Core 2 when a bunch of Quincy activated their holy forms. But now it's a pure dark green. I like the colour, don't get me wrong, but it's weirdly inconsistent and only with this one character. However, the anime actually does add an impressive new moment for Robert where Ichigo tries to strike him with his blade, only for the sternritter to actually block it with his gun and knock it aside. And then the chapter content continues as Ichigo swings at him and Robert dodges. Ichigo's then grabbed from behind by Bazz-B, but before he can strike with Burner Finger 1, Renji arrives in the nick of time, rescuing him with Zabimaru. Again, Bazz-B's face does look pretty weird here in this shot, but again, the slightly dodgy artwork this week is only really exacerbated because normally it looks so very good. Renji loudly proclaiming he saved Ichigo is cut from the episode, as is the comedic moment where Ichigo complains about almost being slashed. As Renji speaks to Ichigo, we can see Nanana is also with the other sternritter and also has his Volstendig activated. His Ryatsu is orange coloured, which we saw a few episodes ago, and his wings are made up of connected rings. While I've seen some people say this is the first time we've ever seen it, that's not actually true, as Nanana's wings are visible in chapter 586, when the sternritter all activate their holy forms at the same time. Considering how long Renji talks to Ichigo for in this moment, it is weird to think the three sternritter are just standing right there doing nothing, but as Ichigo leaves, they all give chase. It's nice to see Robert included here as opposed to him doing nothing at all, only to be stopped by a rushing wave of pink sakura blossoms. As we reach the end of chapter 585, Renji, along with Byakuya, Rukia, Hisagi, Ikkaku and Yumachika, step in to defend Ichigo from the sternritter and prepare for a huge battle. Now, I wasn't really expecting this 8v1 showdown with Ichigo and the other sternritter to be extended at all. I'm more hoping that some of the subsequent battles between the Gotei 13 and the sternritter that stem from this moment are extended in the next couple of episodes. Speaking of the upcoming episodes and upcoming sequences, the entire first sequence of chapter 586 is cut from the episode, featuring the Shinigami preparing to square off with the sternritter. As Robert confirms that none of their enemies are special war powers, Bazz-B prepares to fight them before Ikkaku tries to attack him and Rukia freezes his arm. The scene ends with both sides coming together in a furious clash, seemingly setting up a calamitous skirmish to come. The reason I'm not delving too deep into this moment is pretty simple. Although it's been cut from the episode, I don't think it's gone for good. I actually imagine that the next episode will probably feature this sequence, though admittedly it's a little awkward to do so, unless some things have been changed up. As we reach the final scene of the episode, Ichigo closes in on Yhwach, a huge Quincy arrow suddenly blasting towards him. Ichigo quickly smashes it to pieces and looks up, only to be horrified to see none other than Uryu Ishida standing alongside the Quincy King. The remainder of the scene plays out almost identically to the source material. Ichigo, shocked to see his friend has seemingly betrayed them and joined the Vandenreich, demands to know what Uryu is doing with Yhwach. Uryu simply tells him to leave before he throws his life away, but as Ichigo grows more agitated, Uryu draws his bow once more and unleashes Lichtregen, raining arrows down upon his friend. This moment is slightly altered here. In the anime, Ichigo attempts to dodge the arrows, being struck and hit by several of them before Chad arrives from Wako Mundo, leaping down from the sky and blocking several of the arrows as Orihime then summons a shield to deflect the rest. In the source material, before the arrows even reach Ichigo, one of Orihime's barriers appears in front of him, and Ichigo and Uryu look over, watching as Orihime and Chad emerge from a Garganta in the sky. Honestly, I like both versions of the confrontation, but I do appreciate the anime giving Chad at least something to do, and hopefully that's a sign of things to come, though I'm admittedly not going to get my hopes up too much. Chad jumping in front of and successfully destroying some of Uryu's licked Regan is fairly impressive actually, and I like the visual of Orihime and Chad actually standing side by side with Ichigo here to highlight the divide between themselves and Uryu even more. Of course, both Orihime and Chad are now also wearing their new outfits. Much like Ichigo, these are the outfits they'll essentially wear for the rest of the series now, but that's it. As Uryu turns to leave his friends, there's no fight between Ichigo and Uryu at all. I'm definitely surprised, though as the episode was playing out, it definitely became increasingly obvious that we were out of time for any kind of a true showdown. Despite every facet of the marketing for this core pointing towards a clash between the two of them, it seems, at least for now, that it's not happening. That doesn't mean it can't happen later, say for instance when the two of them meet again in the Soul King's throne room, but looking at the core ahead, I do wonder when that could possibly be, unless things are drastically changed. Also, Uryu leaving the battlefield without doing anything means they still haven't fixed Yhwach's line about the sternritter witnessing his power in the battles to come, which is annoying. But as Uryu disappears into the sky, Ichigo's voice actor Morita does an amazing job channeling both rage and an undercurrent of confused sadness as well, basically getting across that he doesn't really know what's happening and is processing everything on the fly. As Ichigo cries out to Uryu one last time, the pillar of light transforms into a great arrow, which then blasts upwards through the hole in the veil. The episode ends, frankly, really weirdly. The editing is just totally off here and is yet another example of a sloppy cut this week. The soundtrack is building, the arrow fires, and then it all just fades out immediately. The scene doesn't feel like it's allowed to end naturally at all. While I like treachery being used, perhaps it wasn't the right choice here. Or maybe the final shot should have simply lingered a bit longer rather than instantly being cut short. There's no real sense of dread, no chance to sit with what happened and feel the weight of this scene. The episode absolutely has to end right here, and there's no two ways about it. I feel like this would have been another good opportunity to perhaps play some of the episode over the credits, to actually allow Uryu's ascent to be a slow, dramatic movement. But alas, not only is it over in a flash, it's just weirdly edited too, to the point where, like I said, it feels almost unfinished. But that's the episode, episode 21, The Headless Star. As I said before at the start of this video, this was a really uneven episode for me, probably the most up and down episode of the core to date. It was something of a roller coaster. Before we get into that though, let's talk some predictions for next time. Amazingly, not a single sternritter was actually killed this week, so we don't need the memorial wall for the first time in about a month. So let's look ahead. As I mentioned in my live reaction, there's no episode next week. Instead, I believe it's just a recap. As for the next episode, like I said before, I think we'll see that opening sequence from chapter 586 that was missing from this week's episode. It may even open the episode. Perhaps they'll blast through it before the opening itself plays, then reuse the ending of this episode before carrying on with chapter 587. It's going to be very interesting though. The assault on the royal palace is about to begin and I can't wait to see it. Will there be any changes? That's a big question for me. We do have a couple of other fights to get through first though. Next week we'll likely see Mayuri versus Giselle take centre stage, which should be a lot of fun, especially with all the cameos. I also wonder if Rukia and Renji versus Bazz-B might be afforded some extra screen time. I feel like that's a fight that could be really popular, since seeing Rukia and Renji fighting side by side would be great, and all three characters involved in that scenario are well liked. Either way, like I said, this is when we'll start seeing changes abound. This week's episode has already proven that. So, like I said earlier, as we reach the end here, this week's episode of the 1000-Year Blood War, episode 21, The Headless Star, was a mixed bag. The art was noticeably worse this week, with characters flitting between looking pretty solid and looking generally rough and uneven, and some of the editing choices were peculiar at best. It's a bit of a shame that Ichigo's anticipated return wasn't given the same love and care that previous episodes were, but at the same time I totally get it. Those last 3 episodes, like I said, were a trilogy of huge battles that really defined the first half of the second invasion, and perhaps the second invasion as a whole. And each one was handled really well. I'm expecting the quality to pick up again as we come closer to the end of the core. That being said, the quality was high where it counted. The new fight scene between Ichigo and the Bambies was tremendous stuff. Really the sort of additions I'm after, really exactly what the anime should be being used for, aside from major plot and history revelations. But as far as helping to flesh out the sternritter, it was great. The Bambies all got better looking Volstendig, names for their Volstendig, an actual fight, and a litany of new abilities. It's just a net positive all round. Meanwhile, Ichigo's actual arrival, the long-awaited big talking point of the episode, was portrayed and adapted really well, especially Getsuga Jujisho, which was given the gravity it deserved here. But that's it for the episode this week, guys. I really hope you enjoyed it. This has been a pretty long video, and I am definitely about to lose my voice, which seems to happen almost every week at this point, so I'm going to leave it there. Let me know in the comments what you thought of episode 21, The Headless Star. Did you enjoy it? Were you happy with Ichigo's portrayal this week? And importantly, what did you think of the brand new fight scene between Ichigo and the Bambies? But do let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear it. Make sure to hit subscribe if you haven't done already. Give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. But until next time, I'm going to catch you later, and I'll see you then.